a little bit about the idea of persistence. Persistence as a strategy for theater architecture. Today, it seems that the sustainable development strategy that has been with us for years is not adequate. Building a balance based on economic growth and simultaneous care for the environmental is not enough. A strategy of prevention is not enough. The environmental and social crises we are seeing require regeneration. It seems that a new framework is demanded. New values, new cultural norms are to be based on building new rules of interaction between people and the natural world. We are witnessing a generational shift, and the task of this generation is to participate in solving the world's problems of climate change and environmental decline. It is an acceleration for the transformation of the built environment, turn towards natural materials, a support for closed cycle in design and architecture. It is also a turn towards the renovation and modernization of buildings, a move away from the complete demolition. Space is not to be used. Space is to be cared of. By creating an architectural form, architects are transforming social, cultural, and ecological contexts, having a physical impact on the world. Examples include the winners of 2021 year's Pritzker Prize, Anne Lacton and Jean-Philippe Vassal, who have modernized social housing in Paris and Bordeaux, improving their energy balance and aesthetic quality. The realizations, at once beautiful and pragmatic, defy the opposition between architectural quality and environmental responsibility and the need for an ethical community. The new European Bauhaus initiative responds to the need to link sustainability with beauty, calling for a future that is enriching, inspired by art and culture, responding to needs beyond functionality, sustainable, in harmony with nature, the environment, and our planet, and inclusive, encouraging a dialogue across cultures, disciplines, genders, and ages. Place is an important concept in the social ecological transformation. Specific meanings, experiences, memories, emotions, and symbolic values are socially constructed aspects of a sense of place, exploiting already existing boundaries, attachments, and identities, aims for a global sense of place that transcends them, goes beyond the conventional point of view in which places are reduced to physical locations. Theaters, which are an immanent part of the city structure, can become a tool for building the sense of place. The unique, characteristic place serves the theater, but at the same time, the theater strengthens the attachment to the place through identification with the values of culture. The complexity of the transformation of architecture over time and space inscribes a particular value on it. The characteristic feature of a monument is the richness of its own history. The richness of buildings' history is discovered in its architecture. It remains a characteristic form of the city's past, which we experience again and again. The present contains an ever-widening picture of the past. Every present moment contains the past, and it is the past which does not cease to be, that makes the present constantly pass. Henri Bergson calls this preservation and accumulation of the past in present in present as persistence. Persistence is the past that we are still experiencing. Persistence is memory. Certain original features and functions of building persist. Others are completely changed. Aldo Rossi argues that when a material form taking on even different functions continues to function, the building is alive and can remain an important place in the city. The relationship that the theater builds with its surrounding are part of the process of making these meanings. The surrounding buildings and their purpose are another dimension of the theatrical experience. It is the contact with the material reality of the place, the surroundings of the theater building, which as such marks this place as part of the theatrical experience. It is the building that makes the distinction between interior and exterior, between the real and unreal worlds of theater, creating a transition from the everyday to the magic realm. As Ian McIntosh called, the place where the worlds of audience and actor meet. Guy McAuley, on the other hand, drew attention to the construction of theatrical space, which deals with the issue of drawing a boundary between the world of theater and the outside world, between performer and audience. Architecture draws boundaries in space, giving meaning to a building as a boundary of space makes it a theater. Of particular relevance to the way in which the subject of theater is framed in the context of its environment is Marvin Carson's book, Places of Performance. Evelyn's already talked about this today. Carson draws attention to the fact that theatrical performance is no longer seen merely as a way of enacting a particular dramatic text. Theatrical experience is now understood in a much broader way as a social cultural event whose meaning and interpretation is sought not only in the text presented, but also in the experience of the audience gathered to participate in the creation of the whole event. The way the audience experiences and interprets the play, as it is now recognized, does not depend only on what happens on the stage itself. The theater as a whole, the location of the auditorium, other public spaces, its appearance, and even its location in the city are all important elements in the process by which the audience gives meaning to experience. Marvin Carson considers how performance spaces generate the social and cultural meanings, which in turn are intended to help determine the meaning of the entire theatrical experience. The integration of the theater into its surroundings refers to the way in which the building is positioned in the urban interior, in the street, in the square, in the quarter. There are theaters that dominated their surroundings, others blend in within, or are lost or hidden in it. The relationship between the theater building and the place can be apparent at the level of material solutions and the tectonic of volume. In each case, the solution adopted result from the specificity of the place, the spatial layout of the city, but also from the ideological and compositional assumptions and cultural and social values that the theater building is supposed to express. Theater architecture has always been rebuilt, reconstructed, extended. When the great wave of rebuilding theater started at the beginning of the 20th century, the main motivation was the need to change the layout of the stage in relation to the audience. Prosceniums were built, ramps were dismantled, boxes were removed. For technical reasons, Stage towers were rebuilt, pockets were added, sophisticated performance technology equipment was installed. The need for fire safety necessitated the introduction of steel curtains. Today, historic theatre architecture is still being rebuilt and extended. Sometimes reconstruction is related to the correction of the existing spatial layout. The stage and service area are most often rebuilt, and backstage facilities are adapted to current standards. Theatre buildings are extended with services and technical functions like warehouses, workshops, paint shops. New ancillary areas such as libraries, education rooms, exhibition galleries are introduced. Sometimes the value that remains is the external architectural character. Other times, the interior of the theatre hall. The rest of the theatre is then built from scratch. Sometimes it's the place and substance that give the meaning. The story of the Everyman Theatre in Liverpool is a story of a place. Built in 1837, Hope Hall Chapel was transferred to a concert hall and then a cinema just 20 years later. It quickly became a meaning place for artists, poets, musicians that came to be known as the Liverpool scene. Eventually, they decided to redevelop the building for a theatre called the Everyman Theatre, which opened in 1964. A major redevelopment took place 10 years later. The facade was changed and the floor level of the hall was lowered. Over time, the condition of the building, which had already been rebuilt several times, deteriorated. The building needed to be rebuilt. It was then decided to demolish it and build a new building on the same site. The architectural competition was won by Steve Tompkins and Graham Howarth. The goal was to design a technically advanced and highly adaptable new theatre that would retain the friendly, democratic accessibility of the old building, project the organization's values of cultural inclusion, community engagement, and local creativity, and encapsulate the collective identity of the people of Liverpool. The biggest challenge for architects was to win over those who were worried about the character of the Everyman Theatre would be lost in a new building. So they tried to retain the spirit in the new spaces. The auditorium was constructed from 25,000 reclaimed bricks of Hope Hall and manifesting itself as the internal walls of the foyer. By carefully dismantling the existing structure, 19% of the old building was either recycled or reincorporated. The large ventilation chimneys give the building a special industrial character, whereas the use of typical local bricks alludes to the peculiarities of the surrounding townhouses. The front elevation features a luminous inscription, a reminder of the building's long-standing tradition, harking back to the 70s. The main west-facing facade of the building is a large-scale public work of art consisting of 105 movable metal sunshades, each one carrying a portrait of contemporary Liverpool residents. Another aspect of the concept was to design an urban public building with exceptional energy efficiency, both in construction and in use. The design minimized the space, as architects underline the importance of continuity and compactness of the original sensitive historic site. They avoided the need to acquire a bigger site and demolish more adjoining buildings by efficient use of the site and the density of the adapted form. The building makes use of the complex and constrained site geometry, but arranging the public spaces around a series of half levels establishing a continuous winding promenade from street to auditorium. The design also combines thermally massive construction with a series of natural ventilation systems and low-energy technical infrastructures. Natural ventilation for the main performance and workspaces is achieved via large roof vents and underfloor intake plenums, using thermal mass for pre-cooling. The foyer are vented via opening screens and a large light well. Offices and ancillary spaces are ventilated via opening windows. The fully exposed concrete structure with a high percentage of cement replacement and reclaimed brick walls provide excellent thermal mass, while the orientation and fenestration design optimize solar response. The entire west facade is designed as a large screen of movable sunshades. In this way, culture, by combining the past, present, and future in one place, becomes an important component of sustainable development, especially from an architectural design perspective. This creation of placemaking is not about fitting as many attractions as possible into a specific site, but to extract the greatest possible potential for creativity from this space. It is a complex process in which intuition, emotions, and experience play an important role. Theaters, being an immanent element of the city structure, can become a tool in its modernization. It is one of the truest and most important architectural tasks which should be acknowledged. After Konrad Kuczak-Kuczynski, the author of the fourth dimension of city architecture, who lists three elements of city modernization: social, cultural, and spatial. The cultural element contains both the psychologically important element of attachment to the place through identification with the values of the former culture, and a purely didactic moment. The former architecture of the city is a fragment of the entire culture of the city, region, or country. There is a coupling of the cultural element, testifying to the splendor of the past, with a psychological affirmation and acceptance of forms that modernity can no longer offer. In this way, modernization, while incorporating cultural elements, forces, as it were, when designing both the entire baggage of knowledge in this field and, perhaps more importantly, the demonstration of intuitive delicacy, one's own culture, moderation, and tact in bringing the past to life in contemporary city. It is worth drawing here on particular multifaceted case of the theater under construction in Lublin, Poland. The more than 40 years construction of the building was completed in 2013, when the Meeting of Culture Center by Stelmach and Partners Architectural Office was opened. The idea of building a dramatic theater in Lublin was born in early 70s. It was initiated by the well-known director and drama critic Kazimierz Braun, director of the then Juliusz Osterwa Theater in Lublin. He wanted it to be a small, modern, changing theater space for about 500 spectators. It was to be modest and inexpensive one. It would have been the first black box theater in Poland and Eastern Europe at that time. However, this didn't happen. Decision was made to build a large theater, Philharmonic Hall, and Opera House. Originally, the idea was still to have a viable stage alongside the Italian stage and one of the two theater halls. In the end, however, there was no room at all for a variable space in the huge building. Kazimierz Braun was ousted from the construction in 1974 and resigned as a director of the theatre when construction began. At the same time, the foundation stone was laid by representatives of the highest government authorities. The scale of the project and the economic crisis that hit the country in the 70s and 80s did not allow it to be completed. The building became known as the theatre under construction. It was not until 1990s that the Philharmonic part of the building was completed, and the first concert was played in 1994. However, the rest of the building continued to stand in the shell state, falling into disrepair for the next almost 20 years. At the beginning of the 21st century, it was decided to complete the work. However, it was decided not to realize the original concept of Grand Theatre, but to create a multifunctional cultural center called the Center for Meeting of Cultures in Lublin, which would host cultural activities of a variety of performances, theatrical, musical nature, as well as cultural, educational, and creative activities. The CMC was to help build the image of Lublin and the region on the basis of ecology, a culture of being in the modern world, and the culture of understanding it. The existing structure and equipment were to be retained, except in places and areas where replacement may have been necessary due to the technical condition or because the technical solutions had become obsolete. The old structures needed to be given a new shape, a new idea. In 2008, an architectural competition was announced, and the winning entry was the work of Stelmach and Partners Architectural Office. The authors wanted the project to reflect the concept of time and the multicultural character of Lublin itself. Bolesław Stelmach described the project. The authenticity of the CMC project comes not only from a close reading of the shapes of the past and the future, along with the universal interpretations. It comes, above all, from the understanding the role a human being has to play here, as well as an awareness of the unfinished nature of the petrified form, the condition of being able to reach truth in a conscious abandonment of that which is permanent in favor of becoming. And so we mean not only to retain the authentic elements of the building, which evoke a defined sort of mood, but also to open the spaces through altering their shapes to that which could happen within them. In this sense, the structure of the object must remain unfinished. Its identity cannot solely be derived from the properties of concrete or brick. Identity is more important, being born through the process of being used. End of quote. The main elements of the composition are the great multifunctional hall, the processes of transforming the space of the theatre under construction was, next to the concept of meeting cultures, the most important idea of the project. The existing elements of the brick structure were therefore juxtaposed with new concrete ones. The facade is formed by multi-element glass screens for media light shows, while the house is topped by 3 levels of hanging gardens with expansive views filled with endemic vegetation as a sign of the future. It is meant to be a space for the meeting of different times, a place that has been shaped by different areas, analog, digital, and the area of the unity of culture and nature. The CMC has more than 40,000 square floor space, which houses more than a dozen cultural institutions. Inner streets on several levels connect various squares and inner houses. There is a place for a theatre, a Philharmonic hall, as well as cultural workshops for children or educational activities. The facility includes a chamber hall for 200 people with a variable stage layout, a black box. Back in competition, it was only a small theatre hall for about 100 people, located in the place originally designed as the left side pocket of the auditorium of the large hall. The concept of the meeting of cultures is revealed in the symbolic Avenue of Culture, a road running from Teatralny Square to Maria Skłodowska-Curie Street, through the building, a thoroughfare for the transmission of information and the simulation of creativity. From this internal passageway, one enters a part of the building that contains rooms with various functions: chamber hall, cinema, media library, restaurant, galleries. The Alley of Cultures is a symbolic rethinking of the communist idea and the new functional space. The idea of the social role of culture, which was to be expressed in Kazimierz Braun's black box theatre space, returns in the form of an avenue, open, accessible, flexible, which gives the place a second chance by construction of a creative environment adapted to the desires and aspirations of space users. The monument, testifying to the splendor of the past, is coupled with a psychological affirmation and acceptance of forms that modernity is no longer able to offer. Instead of building only the new, it is necessary to learn to reuse the old, to use it again and again. Instead of building the new, the focus today is exploiting the potential of cultural heritage, acting with respectful place identity, and supplementing with what is necessary for proper functioning. The Maribor Puppet Theatre has a tradition of more than 40 years. The theatre started in 1974 in the premises of the first floor of a former residential building as a repertory theatre, mainly staging new works from contemporary Slovenian children's and youth literature. Since 1990, the theatre has organized the Summer Puppet Festival in Maribor and has hosted several editions of the Slovenian Puppetry Biennale. It has extensive cooperation with festival partners throughout Slovenia, as well as in Austria and Italy. The increasing level of activity over 3 decades meant that the lack of space became increasingly acute. An intensive search for a new location began in the 90s. Initially, the most popular proposal was to locate the new building north of the Slavian National Theatre complex, near the medieval Celigata. Around 2000, another proposal was preferred, which was for premises in a large business building known as City 2 on the west side of Titova Cesta. In 2003, the idea of locating the puppet theatre in the empty complex of the former Monorite monastery on land on the Drava River was floated. As an architectural whole, the former Minorite monastery with the Church of St. Mary arose gradually through various construction interventions from the 13th century, while it became most prominent in the Baroque period of the 18th century, when the church underwent its first major renovation. The Baroque splendor of the Minorite monastery in Maribor didn't last long. In 1784, under the reforms of Emperor Joseph II, the monastery was moved to the complex of the former Capuchin monastery, which stood on the site of today's Franciscan monastery. The former Minorite monastery was used as a military dressing room from 1784 to 1809, as a barracks from 1831 to 1927. From then until 1994, the building was a rather neglected residential building. Before the Second World War, the church was used for a while by the theatre in Maribor as a warehouse. In 1990 and 1998, the church was one of the venues where the Slovenian National Theatre Maribor staged its productions. At the end of the century, the last residents moved out, after which the monastery building began to deteriorate rapidly. The city administration was interested in demolishing the monastery, as conversion into flats would have cost twice as much as replacing the building from scratch. At the same time, the question of suitable premises for a puppet theatre was becoming increasingly urgent. The Maribor conservator Janez Mikusz drafted a proposal for moving the puppet theatre to the abandoned monastery. This would solve two problems: the theatre's lack of space and the issue of the decaying monastery. The conservator was aware of the fact that putting the theatre hall into the minaret church would mean having to obliterate the preserved Baroque appearance of the interior almost entirely. Thus, it was proposed that the urgently needed large theatre hall should be a part of the inner monastery courtyard, where once stood the medieval cloister. The proposal was imaginative, and although controversial, it was justified in the view of the rapid deterioration of the complex. In 2004, the architectural competition to place the puppet theatre in the minaret monastery complex was won by architects Yuri Kobe and Rok Żnidarczyk and co-workers, who, of all the proposals received, best preserved the historical substance of the building while providing space for new content. 1 year later, plans were drawn up to realize the transformation of the monastery into the multimedia event facility as a puppet theatre. At the same time, preparatory work for the renovation began. Under the supervision of conservationist and architect Irena Krajnish-Horvat, the renovation and enlargement was completed. The auxiliary part of the puppet theatre are located in the existing building structure in the northern, eastern, and southern parts of the monastery. Thus, there are rooms for workshops, storerooms, dressing rooms, and offices. The small auditorium and stage are located in the eastern part. The large auditorium was placed where the inner courtyard of the monastery used to be. The hall is equipped with seating on graded platforms. The number of seats can be adjusted for performances with puppets of different sizes. This is made possible by a movable wall with booths and sitting storage. The stage tower was built in the area west of the medieval western part of the monastery. It also serves as a support for the steel ceiling structure of the great hall above the open-air theatre to the west of the stage tower, where the former monastery garden was located. At the end of 2010, the theatre moved to a reconstructed monastery. With 2,500 square meters and 2 stages, it became the largest puppet theatre in Slovenia. The reconstruction was awarded the Plečnik Prize. Later, the adjacent former minaret church was adapted into a hall that seats around 300 spectators. The new venue has been managed by the Maribor Puppet Theatre since 2015. The unique, distinctive space serves the theatre, but at the same time, the theatre strengthens the attachment to the place through identification with the values of the culture. Creating places that are distinguished by local tradition, local identity, local identification, it unites the 5 pillars of sustainable development: technology, economy, society, nature, and the built environment. The architectural reconstruction of existing buildings involves a process born out of the tension between norm and innovation, genotype and phenotype, conservation and progress. The design method that an architect adopts is that of valuing. It is a critical approach of the researcher to the existing meaningful values. It is also an action based on the awareness of rejected historical values or material heritage in favor of a new idea expressed by architecture in the supportive values. Such decisions were made by Steve Tompkins and Graham Howarth in Everyman Theatre in Liverpool, Bolesław Stelmach in Theatre Under Construction in Lublin, or Yuri Kobe and Rok Żnidarczyk in Maribor Puppet Theatre. They all combine the past with the future, used all materials and new technologies, preserved the identity of the place while introducing new values. These and other examples of theatre architecture can serve as signposts for a generational change based on the need to link sustainability with beauty. It is the architect's contribution to solving the world's problem. Through persistence, the past is preserved and accumulated in the present. Obrigado.
There's a question. I'm going to read the question.
The history of the phases of construction of a building is very important because it reveals the political disputes that exist in society. In this regard, I would like to know how this theatre is currently used by different social groups. The theatre is used in two different ways. The first one is it houses institutions. Yes, it houses the Philharmonic Hall, Theatre, and on the other hand, it can house and be given to spontaneous social movements and groups. So it can be both used by institutional culture as well as people who just want to present the art, the knowledge there. And it also can be rented for institution from outside. There are festivals taking place there. So it's really multifunctional. It can be rented. It's for hire. Some parts are rented for free because it's nowadays lots of buildings in Poland are built from European funds, so they are hired for free as certain stage of its construction. So the use is the first years are also like incorporated in the way they are invested. The money are invested. That's how it is, if it's understood